Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Vice Admiral Michael Noonan, Chief of Navy. We're honoured to acknowledge the Honourable Henry Puna, Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, and Mrs. Akatiti Puna, and the accompanying delegation. We welcome and recognise Dr. Chow Chak Wing, a proud Australian citizen, Fellow of the Australian War Memorial, who has given immense and generous support to our young veterans and their families through Soldier On. Joining Dr. Chow this evening is General Peter Lay, Chairman of Soldier On, and Mr. Ivan Slavich, CEO of Soldier On, and the accompanying delegation. We also warmly welcome Mr. Masahiko Kaya, Consul General Japan, General Peter van former Chief of Defence Force of the Netherlands, Air Vice Marshal Bill Henman, President of the United Services Institute of the Australian Capital Territory, Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, and Ms. Gillian Adamson, and Mr. John King, President of the Return and Services League of Australia, ACT branch, and Mr. Alex McGowan, representing the Naval Association of Australia, ACT section. As always, but particularly today, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. And during this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. On this day, 101 years ago, the First World War came to an end. The Great War of 1914 through to 1918 was the largest and most costly conflict the world has ever known. Today, to mark the anniversary, we welcome the Canberra City Pipes and Drums into the commemorative area to perform When the Battle's O'er. Australia's Federation Guard will now dismount the Catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier within the Hall of Memory. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Catafalque party, attention! Catafalque party, present arms!
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, of beauty rich and rare. In history's page let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, and march Australia fair.
Catafalque party, shoulder arms! Catafalque party, order arms!
If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. The Roll of Honour lists more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. And normally at this ceremony, we tell the story behind just one of those names. But each year on Remembrance Day, we commemorate all service and sacrifice by reading the Eulogy for the unknown Australian soldier. But first, we welcome back the Canberra City Pipes and Drums to present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection. now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to deliver an address.
In 1920, the British and the French respectively exhumed and repatriated to the Westminster Abbey in London and the Arc de Triomphe in Paris one of their unknown dead. The unknown warrior in Westminster Abbey was recognised by Australia as our unknown soldier. Australia started debating in 1920 whether we should similarly exhume and repatriate one of our unknown dead. But whilst there was a significant movement amongst returned veterans for that to be the case, the overwhelming view of both the Australian government and the antecedents of what is today's RSL was that our loyalty to the mother country was more important still than our emerging sense of national identity and independence. In 1993, approaching the 75th anniversary of the armistice, the end of the First World War, the Australian War Memorials Management proposed that we should, to mark the 75th anniversary, bring back one of our own. The RSL changed its long-standing policy. The Australian government supported it. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission supported it, as did the French government. In early November 1993, from the Adelaide Cemetery in France, the site of the Australian defeat of the vicious German counterattack on Anzac Day, 1918, from the Adelaide Cemetery, of 964 graves, 262 of them Australians, 4 unknown Australian soldiers' graves were chosen, and then one at random was chosen to be the unknown Australian soldier. He was placed in a Tasmanian blackwood timber coffin, an Australian flag draped over it, Australian Army slouch hat on top. He spent a day at the Australian Memorial at Villa Bretana, a night under the Menin Gate in Ypres, Flanders, where the last post was played over him. Flown back to Australia by Qantas and then an RAAF C-130 Hercules to Canberra, he spent 4 nights in the King's Hall in the Old Parliament, and then on Remembrance Day, in 1993, a gun carriage slowly moved his coffin up Anzac Parade. The Governor-General was the mourner-in-chief, the Prime Minister, the 6 Premiers, 25,000 Australians straddled Anzac Parade with army and military banners, military guions. His coffin was placed on the stone of remembrance in front of the memorial for the laying of wreaths and ceremony. And then, with much ceremony, the casket was brought up here, up these steps, and into the Hall of Memory before you, and his coffin was placed in the tomb. In a moment of unscripted informality, Robert Coombe, military medal recipient, came from the western side wearing his slouch hat, a veteran of the First World War, and he poured soil from Pozières on top of the coffin, and he said, "You're home now, mate." 60,000 people filed around that coffin and that tomb over the following week. And on that day of the interment, our nation received Jeffersonian oratory from our then Prime Minister, the Honourable Paul Keating, the eulogy to the unknown Australian soldier, regarded by many as the finest speech given by any Australian Prime Minister on any topic ever. And for the 20th anniversary, we took the key phrase from the eulogy and placed it onto the front of the tomb. He is all of them, and he is one of us. And our Chief of Navy will now read the eulogy to the unknown Australian soldier.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. I would now like to invite Vice Admiral Michael Noonan to read the eulogy of the unknown Australian soldier.
We do not know this Australian's name, and we never will. We do not know his rank or his battalion. We do not know where he was born, nor precisely how and when he died. We do not know where in Australia he had made his home or when he left it for the battlefields of Europe. We do not know his age or his circumstances, whether he was from the city or from the bush, what occupation he had left to become a soldier, what religion, if he had a religion, if he was married or single. We do not know who loved him or whom he loved. If he had children, we do not know who they are. His family is lost to us, and he was lost to them. He will never know who this Australian was, yet he has always been among those whom we have honoured. We know that he was one of 45,000 Australians who died on the Western Front, one of the 416,000 Australians who volunteered for service in the First World War, one of 324,000 Australians who served overseas in that war, and one of 60,000 Australians who died on foreign soil, one of 102,000 Australians who have died in wars this century. He is all of them, and he is one of us. This Australian and the Australia he knew are like foreign countries. The tide of events since he died has been so dramatic, so vast, and all-consuming. A world has been created beyond the reach of his imagination. He may have been one of those who believed that the Great War would be an adventure too grand to miss. He may have felt that he would never live down the shame of not going. But the chances are he went for no other reason than that he believed it was the duty he owed his country and his king. Because the Great War was a mad, brutal, awful struggle, distinguished more often than not by military and political incompetence. Because the waste of human life was so terrible that some said victory was scarcely discernible from defeat. And because the war, which was supposed to end all wars, in fact, sowed the seeds of a second, even more terrible war, we might think this unknown soldier died in vain. But in honouring our war dead, as we always have, we declare that this is not true. For out of the war came a lesson which transcended the horror and tragedy and the inexcusable folly. It was a lesson about ordinary people, and the lesson was that they are not ordinary. On all sides, they were the heroes of that war. Not the generals, not the politicians, but the soldiers and the sailors and the nurses. Those who taught us to endure hardship, to show courage, to be bold as well as resilient, to believe in ourselves, to stick together. The unknown Australian soldier was one of those who, by his deeds, proved that real nobility and grandeur belongs not to empires and nations, but to the people on whom they, in the last resort, always depend. That is surely at the heart of the Anzac story, the Australian legend which emerged from the war. It is a legend not of sweeping military victories so much as triumphs against the odds, of courage and ingenuity in adversity. It is a legend of free and independent spirits whose discipline derived less from military formalities and customs than from the bonds of mateship and the demands of necessity. It is a democratic tradition, the tradition in which Australians have gone to war ever since. This unknown Australian is not interned here to glorify war over peace or to assert a soldier's character above a civilian's, or one race or one nation, or one religion above another, or men above women, or the war in which he fought and died above any other war, or one generation above any that has been or will come later. The unknown soldier honours the memory of all those men and women who have laid down their lives for Australia. His tomb is a reminder of what we have lost in war and what we have gained. We have lost more than 102,000 lives, and with them, all their love of this country and all their hope and energy. We have gained a legend, a story of bravery and sacrifice, and with it, a deeper faith in ourselves and our democracy, and a deeper understanding of what it means to be Australian. It is not much to hope, therefore, that this unknown Australian soldier might continue to serve his country. He might enshrine a nation's love of peace and remind us that in the sacrifice of the men and women whose names are recorded here, their faith is enough for all of us.
Catafalque Party, shoulder, arms.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. In the going down in the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Catafalque Party, present arms.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catafalque party, in words, turn. Catafalque party, quick march.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.